It was nearly dusk when Sarah's car broke down on the edge of Birch Hollow, a small town she'd never heard of before. Her GPS had taken her through winding back roads for what seemed like hours, and now, with no cell service and the engine dead, she was stranded in the middle of nowhere. Birch Hollow was unsettling. Even from the car, Sarah could see the outline of an abandoned village through the trees. Old wooden houses slumped into themselves, their windows dark and hollow, like the eyes of something long dead. There was no sound, no birds, no wind, just a suffocating silence. She glanced at her phone. Still no signal. Her only option was to walk into town, hoping to find help, or at least a working phone. She grabbed her flashlight and stepped out of the car. The air was thick and heavy, the kind that made her feel watched, though there was no one in sight. As she walked, the crunch of her footsteps on the gravel road was the only sound. She tried to tell herself it was just a quiet evening, but something felt wrong. She reached the edge of the village and stopped in front of a rusted sign, half buried in weeds. "Welcome to Birch Hollow." The sign was old, weathered by years of neglect. Beyond it, the town stretched out in eerie stillness. There was something off about this place. The houses looked ancient, untouched by time, but at the same time decaying. Yet it wasn't just the appearance, it was the feeling, as if the town was waiting for her. Sarah approached the first house, its front door slightly ajar. Her pulse quickened, and she debated going in, but the need to find help overpowered her unease. She pushed the door open and stepped inside. The air inside was musty, thick with the scent of decay. Dust hung in the air like fog, and the floor creaked under her weight. She swept her flashlight across the room. It was filled with old furniture covered in white sheets, the kind you'd expect in a place long abandoned. But the sheets weren't as dusty as they should have been. Someone had been here recently. Her foot caught on something, and she stumbled, barely catching herself. She glanced down and froze. A child's doll lay on the floor, its eyes missing. The face was cracked and discolored, the kind of toy that had been loved too hard and too long. But that wasn't the unsettling part. There was something tied to the doll's hand, a thin black thread leading into the darkness of the next room. Sarah's breath hitched. She debated leaving, running back to her car, but her legs wouldn't move. It was as if something held her there, compelling her to look closer. She followed the thread with her flashlight, her heart hammering in her chest. It disappeared under a door at the end of the hall. Slowly, she approached the door and opened it. The room was dark, save for her narrow beam of light. It landed on the back of an old rocking chair, slowly swaying back and forth. Sarah's mouth went dry. The thread led to the chair, where the doll's twin sat cradled in the arms of a figure, its back to her, head slightly bowed. For a moment, Sarah couldn't breathe. Then the figure stopped rocking. Her flashlight flickered. "Who's there?" Sarah whispered, barely audible. She wasn't sure if she wanted an answer. Slowly, agonizingly slow, the figure began to rise from the chair. It didn't turn around. Instead, it stood there as if deciding something before taking a slow, deliberate step toward her. Sarah stumbled back, her flashlight flickering out entirely. In the pitch black, she fumbled for her phone, desperate for any light. The silence was unbearable now, pressing against her ears. She could hear nothing but the rapid thudding of her own heart. Then she heard it. A soft, shuffling sound, like something dragging across the floor, coming closer. Sarah bolted, racing down the hallway and out the front door without looking back. She sprinted through the village, past the empty houses and into the woods, the sound of her own breath loud in her ears. But even as she ran, She could feel it behind her. Something was following. The trees blurred past, branches whipping at her face as she pushed herself harder, faster. She didn't stop until she saw the faint glimmer of her car through the trees. Panting, she slammed into the driver's seat, locking the doors behind her. She reached for the ignition, knowing full well the car wouldn't start, but desperate for any sense of safety. She fumbled with her phone again, praying for a signal, but there was nothing. Suddenly, there was a tap on the window. Sarah froze. The flashlight on her phone flickered to life, casting a dim light over the inside of the car. Slowly, she turned her head toward the window, her pulse racing. Standing there just inches away was a face, pale and sunken, its eyes hollow and dark. The same thread that had led to the doll was tied around its wrist, frayed and fragile. The figure stared at her, unmoving, its lips curled into a grotesque, twisted smile. The last thing Sarah remembered before everything went black was the sound of her phone hitting the floor, the screen shattering as the figure's hand slowly tapped on the glass. A few days later, a hiker found Sarah's car abandoned at the edge of Birch Hollow, the doors locked, the windows unbroken. The police searched the area, combing the woods and the town, but no sign of Sarah was ever found. Only her phone remained, its battery dead, the shattered screen displaying one final message: no signal.